And we are live. Hey, everyone. Thanks so much for joining us once again on the Seattle Data Guy Live. Hopefully, everyone's enjoying their Thursday. With me today, we have Dan. Dan's going to be our special guest. Dan, how are you doing?
I am well. Thanks, Ben.
Yeah. Well, before we go too deep, Dan, you've got you got a lot of cool things that you've done in your past. Currently at Amazon and AWS, but before that, Calendly, doing a lot in terms of like data architecture and helping companies set that up. So I'd love to hear kind of just a little bit about your background.
Yeah, sure. I've been working in data for almost 20 years now, maybe over 20 years. Back when we were called ETL developers, or at least that branch of data engineering. And before that, some software development and architecture as well. But kind of fell in love with data early on in my career and have gotten to see a lot of things, a lot of industries, a lot of different challenges and problems, both technology and people.
Yeah. So that you said ETL developers. What do you think eventually made people switch? And do you feel like there's a big difference, or how do you kind of feel that difference exists?
Yeah, I think. Well, maybe it's mostly a name, but I think like early on, the sort of traditional ETL developer put a large emphasis on tooling. Maybe the drag and drops, not as a pejorative, it made their lives easier. And then there was this like merging of software engineers that really wrote more code and the folks that, were drag and dropping components. And I think that's been a good merger, actually. I really appreciate both, actually combining both together.
Yeah. Are you saying that low code, no code isn't new?
It's not new. No, I don't think it's new. I mean, It's not new to me. So maybe it's new. Maybe I was an early generation of it, but 20 years ago doesn't sound new to me. And not in data. That's ancient.
It's just, I guess every once in a while when I see vendors, I'm always like, I mean, we've been doing this I feel like drag and drop has existed for a little bit.
Yeah.
Maybe they're a little more, they cover a little more, maybe they're a little bit, maybe they're in the cloud. There's like a few things that's something you won't want to do, but I get it.
Yeah. And I think that like the incorporation of engineering principles into them was a big change, a positive change. That's probably the biggest, the biggest benefit to sort of merging those disciplines.
Yeah. I was thinking, so basically, you've been in the data world for about, like you said, 2 decades. Over your career, what have you seen as kind of the most impactful changes in the way that like data engineers and architects kind of operate in the business?
Yeah, I mean, one of those is ones we were just talking about. I think the application of engineering principles and sort of treating that data teams more like a software development team has been really impactful. That has come with its own challenges as well. The Venn diagram is pretty close, but there are some differences. And I think those differences have been impactful as well because they've created a lot of areas of innovation in our space, trying to solve some of those typical engineering principles, but applied to data and in support of those use cases.
Yeah. Like, can you give a few maybe examples of what you feel like are good use cases there?
Yeah. So I think about, I was thinking about this in preparation for this event and really trying to put a fine point on it. And I struggled a little bit, but I think the biggest one for me is sort of how, if you create a feature, if you write a feature in, some JS framework and it doesn't go well, people aren't going to use it, right? Like they're not going to use it, and you'll know, we have analytics to measure how people use features, and if they're broken, if we missed a bug, we'll patch it and we'll improve upon it. To me, it seems like the data team takes a bigger trust hit when things don't go well. There's almost like a larger expectation that the data will be perfect from whatever perspective that is. And if it's not, then it seems to me like people are like, they have more options to go elsewhere. And so they just, I'm not going to use that anymore then because I can't trust it. So I'm going to make my own thing.
Yeah. Yeah. Have you seen, I feel like you probably have seen that happen a lot. I feel like it's to some degree an inevitability, right? Like shadow data teams, all of that just kind of naturally occur, you know. Do you have any feelings in terms of like how companies should best handle that? Because it's like it's one of those things where it's like you can fight it, but it happens. So
Yeah, I think it's a culture thing, actually. I think it's understanding the nuance between the app dev side and the data side, and then applying processes and expectations to those nuances. So an example would be like, yeah, I can, typical app dev could maybe turn out a feature in a day. And I'm pulling all this out of my brain right now, but I think there's more rigor involved in data, especially when you're dealing with large volumes. It's harder to detect variances. There's just I think the stakes are higher, and we don't treat it as though that's the case. Just jam it out, whatever you can get done, and then inevitably we find issues. And I think data teams feel this too. They feel like the crunch, like I got to do it quickly, but I've got to do it perfectly. And we all know there's trade-offs, in any of those worlds. So I think it starts culturally, is understanding like what are the imperatives for this data? Like, does it have to be perfect? Or does it have to be now? And like framing it that way, like perfect or now, and I guess trying to get that language into the business. Like I can give it to you now, but it won't, it might be 80% accurate or whatever target you're hoping for with that quick turnaround. But I also think being honest about it, being able to be honest about it and saying, well, if I've got to turn around in a day, it's not going to be perfect. And as long as you're cool with that up front, then let's go. I think data teams get stuck in get their heels dug in because they have that pressure. Well, if it's not perfect, then you're gonna hate on me later. And so sometimes you can be a little I think that you can be a little unpragmatic at that way.
Yeah, it's funny. I was reading someone's comment where they were talking about how they often tell you can do things fast, like what is it, fast, cheap, or well, or something along those, or right. And they're like, the problem is it feels like my boss wants all three. And it's just like, well, it is a pick two situation, for most people. I mean, maybe you're really good, but I think for most people, it's not.
No, it's definitely. I mean, I think for all of us, it's a pick two situation. And almost no companies I've worked for are willing to go with the most expensive option to get good and fast. And I actually think that's right, because it's also difficult to glean the ROI from whatever you're building. Like, I think that's important to try to do, but it is hard to pin the the exact return on a fact table you built, like one of them. Right. Especially once you build 20, the ROI for each of them goes up. So it's hard to do that. It's hard to say what it would be worth and make a cost decision.
Yeah. Do you have any tips for people who are trying to? Because I feel like that's always the question I get as well. Is like ROI. How do I figure that out?
Yeah, I think it's important for data teams to understand what even ballpark what the cost of what they're building is going to be. I think that can help. I think you can say, I've been in meetings where I've said things like, okay, that'll cost 10 grand a month. Just kind of off the top of my head, and we can go back and later and question it, but I think putting a dollar to it helps business leaders for sure do that math on their own. Like they decide. You might not know what it's worth to the company, although it's better if you do probably. But if you give them information to say, is it worth 10 grand a month? Like, is it going to save us money or be part of a product that's going to bring in revenue? Like, where are we gaining here? And I think giving that context is useful. If someone says doesn't bat an eye, then then that's great. Like like it's worth more than you would have thought it would be.
Yeah. I like that. I've definitely done that from time to time, especially when almost on the other side, when people are like, we want to like hire someone for something, where I'm like, hey, you could use a tool somewhere. And I'm like, okay, well, one option is $200 a month. The other option is $10,000 a month if you hire someone. So I'm just saying, like, if you really want to hire someone, that's great. You will get benefits, but it is considerably more expensive.
And I think data teams need to be better, more aware of their own costs. I mean, this is myself included. I've been woefully ignorant at times about, building a building pipelines and then go back and go, holy cow, it's costing that much money. I really should have known that on the front end, or at least had an idea.
Yeah.
Because then we're armed with that. Then we know, because someone's going to come ask at some point. Someone's going to ask your manager, your boss, like, what's our cloud spend right now, and which part of that's our sort of general infrastructure, and what's part of that's our pipeline. And I think it's just good for engineers to know that, even high level.
Yeah, no, I like that idea of just knowing. It makes me think back to Facebook days, and just like, we wouldn't know necessarily cloud costs, but like, you would know they would always have, like, someone would always ask like random metrics in our meetings, like, hey, do we know like this? Or they'd almost do it like a quiz, like who actually knows the metrics of our kind of team,
right?
And so that's always kind of interesting.
Yeah, and those opportunities are good to build trust too. People, if you have a general idea, people feel more comfortable with what you're putting out there.
Yeah. What do you feel like there's like misconceptions in terms of like how both the data and maybe business see data, like where they think data is in terms of like an industry, in terms of like what they can get out of it?
Yeah, I think so. I think there's on the business side, I think we have access to way more data than we did 10 years ago, and it's only increasing. But I think there's a misconception that on the business side that more inherently means better, and maybe even oddly means easier. Like, if you've got all these data points out there, it should be easy to put together this XYZ dashboard. When actually I think the opposite's true, right? The larger variety and where you could potentially pull an attribute from your business, or how you could calculate a metric, you might have 4 or 5 options. And so, yeah, I think it's more complicated, not less. And I also think it doesn't automatically mean that it's going to be better.
Yeah.
You can mine a lot of rock and get a little bit of gold, and I think that's still true in data.
Yeah.
On the data side, I think it's like, on the data team side, I think it's something like, I don't have to look at data as a product. I can just, they're just widgets. And I think increasingly business teams rather are expecting, product and business teams are expecting data products to look like products, and be treated like products, because they could be at any moment, right? You're building something for someone internal, and someone goes, "That's an amazing idea. This is great. What if we put that into the hands of our customers?" And so all of a sudden, you're not just supporting internal teams; you're supporting pipelines that are actually part of your product.
Yeah. I see your Amazon is showing, because I feel like that's like all Amazon's, EC2, all of that just started that way. So it's like, what if we sold this?
Yeah. It's funny, because early on in my career, I worked at a small bank, regional bank, and they had really high costs. They were still on an old mainframe, and I was talking to my boss at the time. I was like, what if we sold part of our mainframe to other banks, like credit unions? And he's like, oh yeah, those are called service bureaus. Those are a thing. I'm like, well, why don't we do that? Like, most of the time, this big honking mainframe just sits there. And my boss at one point, he goes, hey, this is this new thing called AWS, and they built this new service in the cloud you can just drop files into. And I was like, that's my idea. And he's like, I mean, joking, obviously. He's like, no, that idea's been around for a while, man. Like you reinvented it, maybe, but yeah.
I mean, I think that's what goes on in most tech. Like you see people come in who've seen a certain sliver of the space. The difference is, like, maybe they bring a fresh take. Like you said, like the cloud is different than the main, like shared time or however you want to call it, with mainframes. I remember watching. Did you ever watch *Halt, Catch, Fire*?
Yes.
Okay.
Great series.
Very, for anyone out there, very underviewed show. I think I want to say it like came out during like Game of Thrones, so like wasn't watched very often. But it's like Silicon Valley, but more serious, more dramatic, but also same kind of like feeling of like we can build a thing. And at a certain point, I remember like doing shared time on a mainframe. It's like, oh, that sounds familiar.
Right. There's nothing new under the sun is like a real thing, but we do reinvent. We think about it slightly differently and put a spin on it.
Yeah. So, I like that idea of like treating data as a product. I think that was something that really got honed at Facebook. Like, I built products off of data before, but like treating the data itself, especially as like a data engineer, more as a product, because it's like this is something that you serve to other people and they got to figure out how to use it. And if you want to not be the person interfacing every conversation and being like explaining someone, here's the table, here's what it looks like, you better make it good enough so that they can just come look at it and be like, okay, I get it, and then go use it. So I think that definitely stuck out.
Yeah, I think, and ironically, a lot of data teams I've been on have fought that, or you get your initial reaction is like to fight it because it's going to change a lot of what you do. But ironically, those changes are things that data team themselves have likely been fighting for forever. Like all of a sudden, the PM comes to you and says, "Hey, we're going to make this into a product. Now it's important to do like rigorous testing and and failovers and maybe like write audit publish model thing. All these things that maybe you already wanted to do but couldn't find time for." And now someone's giving you the justification, handing it to you with a bow, and you're like, that's going to change everything. It's like it takes us. We're creatures of habit, I think, in our core, and it takes us some time to wrap our head around new concepts like that, even if they're things we already wanted.
Yeah. In terms of like the business, do you feel like there are some demands that are kind of coming down that make it difficult to maybe sometimes deliver as a data team?
Yeah, I think from my experience, it's not, I think it's the frequency and sort of vacillation of demands. I think the biggest challenges I've seen is when there aren't many North Stars. And so, the data products take time to build. Maybe you don't get a chance to finish one before a new one is, hits your inbox that supersedes the previous one. Like completely, like it's a completely different concept. And so I've seen this a lot. I've seen this a lot at startups where what they're trying to do changes so often that focusing on a product is almost pointless at that. I know I just said that's what we should do, but in some cases it doesn't make sense. In some cases it's better to focus on making pipeline building and deploying faster so that you can maybe turn around those other requests quicker. But I think that the idea that whiplash is happening more, maybe.
Yeah. I think one thing I often also think about when it comes to like working with a business and data teams and like low code solutions is speed the solution, right? Because when you look at a lot of vendors, it's always like, we can help you build things faster. But companies have thousands of dashboards, right? They don't use 90% of them, or some crazy number. So right. I do wonder, like, when you think about that, what do you feel like if someone tells you, hey, you can build things faster? Does that like you're like, yes, this solves my problems, or like, what is the actual crux of the problem there?
Right. Yeah, I think it's to me that's a warning sign. Unless what you're producing takes forever. Like I think there's been situations like that too, where it might take months to turn something over, and that's not great either. But largely, yeah, I think faster isn't always better. Yeah. And focusing on the what is important. Obviously, I've been at the shops where 90% of the dashboards aren't used, and so why am I turning around another one of those quickly? Yeah. It almost incentivizes data teams to go slower. Yeah. Because at some point those requests are going to be irrelevant. Maybe quickly.
Yeah. Yeah. It's just more something I've been thinking about. I think like future article I want to write is speed the solution, because it feels like that's what gets touted as the solution. And I think it's because there's like ad hoc requests and certain things that benefit from being fast or just need to be like iterated on. But then I think there's this other side where it's like you said, we're trying to build a product, we're trying to build something that like lasts, and it feels like those things. It's like maybe speed in the sense of like, let's turn this around in a day, isn't the goal. Maybe, yeah, you want it to be fast, but you don't want it to be so fast that like you build it and then it's just wasting compute and things like that.
Yeah, I saw it a lot of customers at my time at Matillion that, and in fact, I helped them in some cases build hundreds or thousands of pipelines very quickly. And well, all they're doing is, digging their own grave, kind of, like a month later, they're like, I'm buried in a million workflows and I can't manage it all. And they don't run together. And like, there's all sorts of compute constraints. And I'm like, yeah, that's not advisable.
Yeah. Careful. I think Matillion's one of those that says you don't need data engineers. And yes,
some of my favorite customers at Matillion were data engineers, but I know the messaging for sure.
Again, another article I'm working on is like everyone wants to get rid of data engineers because it's always been the marketing for a lot of products. But then I look at it and it's like, but one, it's been that way since I feel like at least SSIS, more on the prior versions of DBAs and ETL developers. But again, it just goes back to I don't know if the data engineers being slow is the problem, or at least is the only problem per se that we're trying to solve.
I completely agree. And maybe some of those tools can reduce your team sizes, but they're all going to fall short of something. And the only practical solution becomes to engineer something. And you're going to want somebody who at least problem solves that way or thinks that way.
Yeah. Speaking of you've kind of had a couple roles where you've been in leadership, kind of whether it's being more of the lead architect, kind of manager. I think one thing I always think about with new leads and new leaders is, what does your first 90 days really look like? Like how do you approach that?
Yeah, I think my take is, and people argue about the order, and there doesn't have to be an order necessarily, but I think the stakeholders is first, meeting with all your stakeholders, starting with the C-suite, all the way down to operational folks, who use the data day in and day out, what they're using it for, how it's helping them make decisions or how it's not. Then I think it's meeting with the data teams, getting to know the data team itself, their processes, their challenges, and getting an inventory of their workflows, pipelines, infrastructure. And I think at that point, you can start to put together, there's inevitably going to be stakeholders that say we're not getting X, Y, Z. And I think you can start to understand where that comes from through that process. You can see the ask, you can see what we're delivering, you can see what is falling short, and hopefully put together at least your first pass opinion of why it's falling short.
Yeah. How would you how do you feel like you'd break that down? I guess like in the 30 days, what do you think you'd want to get done? 60 days, 90?
That's what I was thinking of. I think I don't want to spend the first 30 days just talking to business people. No offense. I probably mix it up a little bit. I think I want to earn, it's hard, right? I want to earn trust with both groups, so all groups. So I don't know that I can spend the first 30 days just talking with stakeholders. It's going to have to be a little bit of that. I might chunk it up by competency. I might go talk to marketing, talk to CMO, talk to their operational folks, and then sort of try to peel back the onion on the data team with marketing. And then maybe rinse and repeat that process for the other groups. I think if that's just my personal opinion, if I don't do that, then if I've moved on from marketing and I get all the way down to finance, like things get lost. And it will be more work for me later to try to, sort of collate that all together. Like what did the marketing folks say that was very similar to what the finance folks say? But I think we've gotten good as architects as identifying those patterns as we go. It's, we're kind of used to it. So we hear it and make a mental note. Oh, that's the same as, what Janice said.
At what point do you feel like you need to start delivering? Just like,
yeah, I might put that. That's a tough one because it depends on. It goes back to that, like, is faster better? I think it depends on how confident business folks are with what their own wants are, what their own needs are. Through that process, you might discover that really what's being given or produced is providing little value. And in that case, you can start with some quick wins that solve that problem, but I really think you need to think about it more strategically. If it's little things here and there, then focusing on those little things can be quick wins. I think quick wins are important, showing people that you care, that you're trying to solve their challenges and being pragmatic. But I think it also depends on where the organization's at. Do they know what they need or want? Because trying to figure that out with them will take much longer.
Yeah. Yeah, that's a good way, or at least a thought there, because right, like if you kind of start to figure out that, hey, the solutions that we need are actually like starting either over or doing like a lot larger investment somewhere. That's obviously a big ask, and it's hard to maybe get the budget or get like that buy-in. How do you kind of maybe deal with those conversations, right? Because again, if you don't have any quick wins and you want to you're like, hey, I see this big strategic thing we could do that's going to take 12 months, but will totally shift the way we're doing things. Like how do you kind of approach that?
Yeah, I think there I think for your head not to roll, there have to be some quick wins that you can find. And I think there almost always are. I mean, there probably always are if you're looking for them. I think you've got to do both in that situation. You've got to be able to say, we will devote some percentage of our time to maintenance of existing things and even improvement of existing things to some degree, but also we need to shift our focus to this larger strategy that's going to solve for all these challenges that today, so we're not set up for. And then you're negotiating over the ratio, how quickly and how much time you spend on each one of those things.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. And again, I think that's usually my take is like, you have to have some quick wins. It's really like, the last thing you want to do is put, bet your like everything on the house, or it's like bet it all on the farm, so to speak. Because it's like if you're wrong or if it doesn't turn out well, which it's hard to perfectly line up projects. Like you said, heads roll. You've spent a lot of money. You've lost a lot of money.
Yeah.
And
people quickly wonder what you're doing there, and that's a totally fair question in that scenario, right? Like when they don't see it. I also think we don't do a good job of evangelizing. Like on a data team, we don't share our wins or what we're doing. We don't put out release docs and notes and things like that, like sort of the app devs do, or I don't know. Like we just need to be better at saying this is here, right? Like we heard you asked for this and it's over here. I think we're like a little afraid. Like I hope only the people that ask for that will go use it, not everybody. Yes. Because inherently people will find things wrong with it, and we're too afraid of that. I think, at least I know I have been.
It is interesting seeing, like having that feeling of like how do we show this off, like what is the value, like all those questions. I think over the last few year or so, I've been doing a lot of migrations to Snowflake for a couple companies, from SQL Server in particular, and just seeing like the difference of like how people are able to access data and pull in data. And that's not me even selling Snowflake. You can pick any cloud data platform. I think a lot of the tooling just makes it easier. And like suddenly like more people are like actually poking at it. It's like it can be a little scary. It's like, oh man, so many people are using it, but like two, like you're seeing more value being added there. So I think that's something kind of cool to see, as people are like, oh wait, I can do more. I can actually ask these questions that I've been meaning to ask for a long time, but just have kind of either been manually doing a lot of it once a month or once every 3 months because I don't want to do it, to now just whenever I feel like it. If anything, it can get addictive to some people, which is on the other side. But
yeah, totally. People can get a little obsessed. And what ends up happening, I think that's a great scenario. But what ends up happening is all of a sudden you get inundated with bugs, and our first inclination is to think, oh my gosh, like that's horrible. Like I have all these bugs now. The chance, like probably you had them all along. Like it's just people are using it now, so they're finding them, and both of those things are good. And it feels bad initially, but it's like, oh, now we're aware of these things, and people are using it enough to care. So there are some benefits of that.
Yeah. That kind of brings me back to what you said earlier about how the data team doesn't necessarily tend to have as much leeway with bugs, because like the front end team, the software teams have bugs all the time, right? Like it's just like, oh, we found another one, right? Like it's better go fix it. We'll put in a ticket for it. But the data team doesn't generally have that. It's like, oh, we have a bug. I'm like, one, they might not even tell you. Right. That's always, I think, the worst situation is like no one tells you. They looked at the dashboard. They didn't like it. So they went away, didn't tell you. And then it's just like, OK, but also like it's just not part of the culture to like, again, log those bugs and things of that nature and realize that will happen from time to time.
Right. It's more stigmatized on the data side. And, I try to reduce that on my teams. I think that's a leadership imperative to say, hey, look, we're writing pipelines and code like anybody else. There's going to be things wrong with it. I think people consider like the catastrophic nature of that, or what could be the catastrophic nature of that if there are bugs. But again, with the advent of data engineers, we're better at handling those like we bake in parts of our process to as safety hatches when there are catastrophic things. Like, oh, I can rebuild that fact table and no big deal. Like, I can just rebuild it now. Maybe 10 years ago that was a bigger ask. You didn't really rebuild them much. You added on to them, and rebuilding was a huge event. That doesn't happen as much anymore, I don't think.
I actually remember having a similar like situation where I had to rebuild a fact table that was quite large, like in the terabyte range, and I was like, had that been 10 years ago on a SQL server, like I'm like, oh man, this is gonna take forever. I have to like sit there and like baby it and make sure it runs. And now I'm just like, click, it takes like 10, 20 minutes. It's over. Yep. You look at it, you're like, okay, it didn't cost us too much on the run, and it's done. And I didn't bump into all the other stuff that was running either. So
I remember having to break it down into like chunks and then like, so it was like, how many sprints will it take to actually rebuild that thing, as opposed to how many hours or days? Like literally, like, oh well, we're gonna have to run this in 10-day chunks starting in 2002. So like if I carry the one, that'll be 3 weeks. Or more. Bananas. Not anymore.
It is like these small differences. It's interesting seeing how our workflows have changed thanks to things like whatever on the cloud solutions, and that just make it easier. I just always compare it to SQL Server because I had like a flashback moment as I've been working with a lot of these companies, and it's like oh yeah, you like run out of space, you run out of like memory, like these all exist, and that would not exist in most of the modern solutions that you have. It's like you need more compute, just add gonna put a new thing or increase the size, and it's just clicks away, versus again in the past it's like, well, I can't run this other job at the same time because we have the big job running, and the big job needs to be by itself. That's very, very funny.
It's really, so much has changed in so little time. It's hard to remember that, but it was only a few years ago.
And there are plenty of companies still there.
Yes.
I think that's the other interesting thing. It's like we're in this time where there's like 4 or 5, it feels like, paradigms that exist that could all be true, in terms of like, some people are still on Hadoop, some people are still on Oracle SQL Server, some people are in the cloud, some people are on Redshift, which is kind of its own iteration of the cloud data warehousing. Some people are in Snowflake, some people are in Databricks, and they're all very different in terms of how they can function and how you can set it up. So it is interesting seeing that. So that's why when some people ask me like tooling and what to learn, it's like, honestly, like I can tell you the modern stuff, but you might end up at a company that's still using SQL Server, and that's okay. It's not the end of the world.
Right. Yeah, exactly. Probably there are more like that than there are in the cloud, actually, I would gather. Like we haven't tipped the scale yet, I would guess.
I know it depends on like what you're doing, but I think there's a lot of companies still need to migrate, especially the smaller ones. I think a lot of the bigger ones have moved over, but then even now there's like companies that are doing hybrid to add another paradigm, right? Like they're like, oh man, compute's expensive. What if we like run the bigger jobs locally on our clusters, and then just serve it in the cloud. One of the things we kind of talked about, is data teams kind of getting on these like ad hoc requests. And I think there's always this risk that data teams kind of just become, a service desk, right? Like almost just customer service, but you serve data. How do you kind of avoid that, you feel, and then like become more strategic in that? Like start pushing more strategic.
I think part of that discussion about how we be good partners is important there. Like being a partner with our business counterparts instead of, or at least trying to position ourselves as partners as opposed to like the service desk model. I'll be honest, I this is a struggle everywhere I've been.
Yeah.
There's always I think there's always going to be an undercurrent of reactivity. I don't think that's avoidable. And maybe I wouldn't even avoid it if I could. I think there's value in that. I think it's balancing that with the strategic, and learning how to do that. Sometimes I think that partnership can help. I think, working with your, like I helped a marketing team with their like customer 360, right? Get this big view of their customer, and working with them directly, and not like, collaborating with them often about it, and not just at the beginning and maybe a check-in in the middle and one's at the end. They got to see sort of how complicated, like a seemingly simple thing can turn complicated quickly.
Yeah.
And so all of a sudden the conversation changed. They would say things like, hey, I want to add this, or I'm thinking about adding this, how much additional complexity is that going to add to existing processes? A question they would have never thought to ask before, right? They would have just said, why can't I just get this thing? And so all of a sudden they understand what, how the sausage is made, even though they might not want to, but having that context helps. So I think being that partner does benefit that a lot. And I think it helps, it reduces some of the reactivity.
Yeah. I think it makes sense. Do you feel like in some cases it's just unavoidable? Like in the sense, not unavoidable in the sense of like, you're just going to be a customer service desk and you might not even get to play a strategic role.
Maybe at some places, or maybe for some periods of time, maybe that's just where the organization's at.
Yeah.
I think so. I mean, for me, honestly, it always comes back to the value, the business value of it. Honestly, if that's the most business value that a data team can offer at that organization, okay, great. I don't think we should fight that too hard.
Yeah.
But if we all recognize that there's ways to increase that value to a very large degree, I think we have to be the ones that trailblaze that.
Yeah.
The business is never going to come to you and say, can you take longer with this?
Yeah.
Can you think about this more?
Yeah.
But I don't think it has to be a terrible thing. I've seen great teams run that always have, someone who's that's their job, that sprint or that period of time is to be responding to these ad hoc requests, and you rotate them. You have an on-call person who fixes issues and responds to those things. I think you can balance it out a little bit.
Yeah. Of course, we're assuming your data team is large enough to have someone be on call. There are plenty of data teams where it's like it's one person.
Right. Yeah. Who's going to be on call today? Me. Oh.
Yeah. Don't get me wrong. Like at Facebook, it was great, right? Like there's our team has just our pod has 4 data engineers, and we've got 3 other pods, so there's 12 of us. So
yeah,
we're only going to be on call every 3 months, which is great. Because that when we're on call, I remember being on call. It's like you're just not getting work done. Yeah, at least not as much as you'd like during the week. So yeah.
I actually kind of enjoyed the daily on call stuff because I could do a bunch of things that I could sneak in a bunch of project work or ideas I've had that I never could justify during a normal sprint. But all of a sudden you've got maybe a few hours of downtime here and there. What do you do with that? Well, if you've got things you've been waiting to explore, that's it. Pick up a spike that's been sitting there in the backlog for 2 years just to see if it's still relevant. There's almost always things you can do. And I don't know, those things bother me. So I go to the things that bother me. Maybe I can clean things up.
Yeah, no, I think it makes sense. When you say things that bother you, is that just weird bugs left behind? Is that maybe, hey, we're doing something inefficiently, we could be doing this better, on a bigger scale? Or what do you feel things that bother you?
I almost always have a side project anywhere I've been. And that side project is almost always based on something that I see as something that could be improved fundamentally.
Yeah.
It's worth my time to spend a good amount of time on it to solve, to pitch to the team into the future once I've had time to bake it. But then, it could be other things like tech debt. I've seen so many things that have languished in a backlog that were tech debt related that honestly would take an hour to fix, but there's just no there's no priority impetus to actually do it. Well, when you're on call, it's like it's kind of like a free for all. unless there's things burning around you. You're not going to put those on hold to take care of your pet projects. But when you have time, I think those are the times to do it.
Yeah. I like that, like, whole, like, you always try to find, well, you probably don't try to find it. You see something that fundamentally could be improved, right? I think of, like, I don't know if this is what was the origin of, like, Hive and Presto at Facebook, but I think about that, where it's like, when I was coming into the data world, I was like, oh, Hadoop exists, and you just must learn how to write MapReduce jobs just because that's how it is. And then they're like, or we could put SQL on top of this, and then people don't have to learn it. I was like, oh, that is a better solution, isn't it? We don't have to struggle, right? Like, it's like, I will just lift this big heavy rock myself, or it's like, or we could make wheels, and like make our lives all easier. So I do think
that's crazy talk, Ben. SQL's been dead for, many times it's died in my career. So I don't know why we would bother with that nonsense anymore.
Yeah. So it died for me somewhere in, like, whatever, 2016, 2018. Like, when else did it die for you in your career?
Oh, I like the advent of Hadoop. That was like, oh, SQL's dead because you're going to write these MapReduce jobs, to your point. And then people realized, Spark didn't pick up it was impressive at the beginning. And I used it when it was like, Spark Scala was the most, highly maintained version of Spark. Maybe it still is, but, like, to a large degree. But once Spark SQL came out, that's when it exploded. From what I can see, it made it more accessible. And so, I've seen it the Hadoop. I've seen it in, I don't know. It's just always there in the ether for me.
Yeah.
It gives me a chuckle.
Yeah. I imagine, like, the other part of it was like Hadoop, MongoDB was, like, coming out and, like, hammering marketing, like, NoSQL was the thing. And so, like, on both the analytics and operational side, you were seeing, like, a new solution possibly exist. But yeah, no, it is about accessibility. Like, when you're building a product, if, like, more people can work with it, they're going to work with it.
Right.
I think the way people often describe it is or I don't know who states it, but it's the whole low floor, high ceiling kind of situation, where it's like, it doesn't take much to learn SQL, or at least get the basics. It takes a lot to master it, but, like, getting the basics, no problem. Yep. Whereas a lot of these other tools, it's like, it takes a lot to even just get started. Like, oh, Hadoop, you got to spin up your own cluster, you got to do all this stuff. Like, it's going to take forever. So I think that probably didn't help in, like, its ability to get adopted quickly.
Yeah, and it's like I find the biggest irony right now is just big push for, like, natural language processing.
Yeah,
like just type in a question. But ironically, SQL's been the closest to that over anything else. It already follows some sort of semantic things that we just understand very quickly. So it's both dead and very much alive at the same time, kind of all the time in a weird way.
Okay, some sort of cat in a box, some sort of Schrodinger's cat situation going on here. No, it is interesting. Like, the whole NLP, like, again, that's been something that I've seen since I came into the data world, and I'm trying not to be, like, biased against it because of that. I'm like, it's hard to not feel jaded because, again, you're like, I've been seeing this for, like, a decade. No one has done this.
Right.
Maybe now we will. I think I still open, like, these. At least in my mind, I still envision at least what we're trying to solve. The harder problem is, like, these 1,000-line queries that I sometimes open. So I'm like, I don't know. Like, I've put this into certain LLMs and they've, like, been, like, too much. I can't handle it kind of situation. So I don't know on those. But maybe on those, like, ad hoc reactive requests, I'm like, that I can see. I don't know about these other longer ones. But
right. My hope for it, I guess, the best I feel like I could hope for it is that it actually makes just data more accessible to people, right? The ad hoc things will increase, but from themselves, self-service ad hoc, they won't. The barrier is even lower now, maybe for more people, which would be great.
Yeah. So, yeah, that's kind of where I'm feeling as well. I'm like, yeah, maybe just more of those ad hoc, and then we can maybe what that lets us do is just build a better core layer of data and then maybe build more of that semantic layer, which then makes the other parts better. And then everyone's happier, right? Like then there's less time, or like we can focus more on engineering. I think the one problem there is like the business comes in and is the business and it's like, well, then we can do this with less people. And it's like, well, or we could do this better. like we could actually finally do this better. Like you could keep the same number of people. We could do that part better. And then you just can be asking questions then you're, when you need to.
The first scenario you mentioned, I think, is the dream. And to your point, if we don't having more energy focused on curating that ecosystem that supports it, will improve it for everybody. But if we cut it off its legs, it's going to make it worse for everybody. So I agree. That's a struggle. Now we can do more with less. Well, we can, but it's about what we're focusing on.
Yeah. Well, it's interesting because I'm seeing that. I'm seeing a lot of companies push their data teams to do more with less, right? Whether that's just through natural attrition, whether that's through shrinking teams. But I also feel like I'm talking to people that reference burnout more and more. And I don't know, maybe it's just now that you just hear those things. And I feel like there are people who feel like I'm getting tired. Like I feel like I can't win. I feel like I have to go home and keep working to like meet these needs. Sure, AI can kind of help, but there's still this demand that is kind of a little bit hard for me to balance. I don't know if you feel like you've had similar conversations, but
I see that with all my customers today, the data focused ones. And I think that's a trend. I think it crosses, I think it's most of tech actually. I don't think it's just unique to data, but yes, it's an interesting development in data when, the importance of AI, or the elevation of AI in the business makes the data more important, not less. And I think I think we're going to struggle with that for a while too.
It's just always these challenges that are like, again, in a perfect world, you would just keep the same number of people and then have them build better. And then that would make the AI better in some of these things, at least for the reactive part. But we'll see.
That's how it could go.
I mean, I guess that is one of the next questions I had, which is like, how do you kind of see data teams changing in the next 5 years in terms of like process, in terms of like everything?
I wonder how much existing data engineers move more towards the ML and the AI side. I think they're going to be increasingly asked to. I wonder who will be game for that, or how many of us will be game for that. I'm certainly interested in it. It's fascinating to me. It is a different skill set. It requires more academic knowledge than probably your typical data engineering role does. And so, but that's what I think is going to happen. I think you're going to see, just kind of like ETL developers and data software developers merge and data engineers. I think you're going to see more and more ML things start to be taken on by the data team. And I don't mean just like setting up the pipelines. I mean, maybe even building ML models. Maybe like we'll offload some of the canned models, like even like leveraging some of the cloud services that are really just ML models under the cover, things like Extract and Lex and the other cloud variants. Data engineers can use those. We don't have to know what's going on under the covers necessarily, but that might free up our data scientists to be building custom models. That's my guess but honestly, things have changed so much, so often. 5 years is like an eternity. Who knows?
Yes. Yeah. I mean, like I was looking again, like peak Hadoop was 2015. That's 10 years ago, but still, that was like, if you look at Google Trends, like it's literally 2015 is like the apogee, the apex of that. And then from there, it's just been a kind of a downfall slowly. And then, now it's kind of like Snowflake and Databricks, at least as like the underlying kind of popular solutions, and BigQuery and a few others. And then the question becomes, when do those get shaken up? Or will they kind of stick around for the next little bit?
Yeah.
Will other parts change?
Right. You see like the table format wars, like kind of pulling down. But what's lurking? What's behind that that's going to go through a similar process, right? Like like or what's going to emerge? I wonder that. Like, what I think tooling will change. I think people will start building new tooling with AI and ML at their core, things to serve the data team to improve their output and their quality. But that means some places probably contract, or some tools contract, or even consolidate.
Yeah. I think you're like the whole like at their core is kind of one of the like concepts that like shift generally technology, right? Like it's what shifted things from Hadoop to and other tools to like Snowflake and Databricks is like, well, they were cloud focused, right? Like the cloud didn't exist before. Now it does. These solutions built on top of that. Tableau is kind of interesting because like I'm thinking like BI is one of the spaces that hasn't been shaken up for a long time. Like Tableau wasn't built on the cloud. It's an app, it's a native app, which is why it's still clunky to work with, right? It's like, oh, I have Tableau, I have to download it and then push it to the cloud. And it's like, this whole kind of rigmarole. You can't use all the features in the cloud to develop that you can locally. Right. So yeah, it's like, okay, is this finally going to be the thing that shakes up BI? It's like, okay, you have the cloud plus AI. Like, can this build us, a BI platform that people are like, let's go to that one. Let's not go on what we're currently building, because I think that's
like anybody that has to add big things into their existing offering is behind someone who can build it from the beginning. And there's always going to be that, but it's not clear who will be affected. To me, at least, what's the end result of that? It'll be interesting to see.
Yeah. I did have one more question, at least on the list. So, in terms of like dealing with conflict, have you ever had to like deal with conflict with a leader that maybe you disagreed with?
That never happens. Absolutely. And in fact, I think if that doesn't happen, that you're doing it wrong a little bit. I think everybody should be trying to push the envelope a little bit, and inherently that means that we're going to disagree at times.
Any tips for that?
I mean, I think we can get pretty. I know. I'll speak for myself. I know I can get pretty entrenched. Like if I spend a lot of time on something, the more time I spend on it, the more I believe I understand it at its core. But I sort of recognizing that there's another perspective to this. And so I think understanding, if I want someone to understand my perspective, I need to understand theirs. Like that's an imperative. Like I can't go on like, no, like this is, we're going to do it this way because these are my reasons and they're the most important. And they're almost always, I found the conflicts are almost always about an approach, like how we're going to do something, and very rarely about the what. Like what we're actually doing, what we're producing, and how it's going to help. So I think refocusing into that too. Okay, great. You got approach A, I got approach B. We both agree that it could, in general, could solve the problem. Which one serves the end result best? And and what's our criteria for success? Let's rehash that. Like, are we, is data quality a really big issue? Because approach A will have a higher degree of data quality built in, and approach B may not. Like, I think just putting all the risks out there, like what the trade-offs are, and then aligning those trade-offs to the outcome you're all reaching towards. That's helped me look at what my own approach and gone, well, I wasn't even building this for the approach I took wasn't for the right reasons. And so it's helped me let go of, well, I don't have to have the best answer. Like the best answer is the one that has the best result.
No, I think that makes sense. I like the whole like approach thing, because that is usually like people have similar goals, but it's like how to get there can change. Do you ever feel like you had a heated conversation where it was like someone's going to get fired, or just like general disagreements?
I've only really had one of those times. I've only had an argument like that maybe once in my career. And yeah, I mean, it took me, like, I was too dumb to realize that we were having that kind of disagreement. It was probably more of a personality issue. Like I just didn't realize that we were fighting. So I'm joking around and just kind of being sarcastic, and this person's getting more heated and more. I'm making it worse with everything I say, and that was not my goal. But I mean, there's been times we've had like, I mean, I've had other like, I say more heated arguments or slightly heated arguments. Again, I get like those are techniques I use to back out of those, is to say, wait a minute, what is really important to you? You know, why is this even a conflict for me? Like, this is what's important to me. Is it, you know, where do we disagree? And then, okay, well, how are those things going to solve the actual problem?
Yeah.
You know, detaching ourselves from the approach, I think, helps. Not completely. I think there's a time and a place and a space for like role division. You know, if you're a enterprise architect and you're responsible, if you're held accountable for certain things, then I think you have to make sure that that's protected. But other people have a perspective too.
Yeah. No, I like that. Like that, taking a step back and being like, look, what is it that, you know, you're really doing, like wanting, what am I not seeing? Because I think that's usually, like I said, the situation is like, you might be saying the same thing, you might just not be seeing it, or again, you might want the same thing, you're just not conveying it in the same way. And maybe in some ways that ends up in an argument that you're like, we're in an argument, we're fighting, I thought we were just
I mean, I did have one, I remember one where I was like I was really dug in on this issue. I'm like, well, if we do it that way, we won't be able to rerun this. Like we won't, it's not idempotent. Like we'll never be able to reprocess this safely. Like that was the crux of the issue that we eventually got to. And the person who looked at me and said, I'm never going to rerun this thing ever. Yeah. Like never, like this is an experiment. I was like, oh, well then, of course, why would I care about that then? You know, like it took me to understand their point of view, to let go of that.
Yeah. You're like, they're like, I'm literally running this once. I am never going to run it again.
Right.
I am just curious, but
They even said like something snarky, like if I have to run this a second time, you know, like you can walk me out the building. Like, you know, like something like that's how serious I am.
Yeah. Although someone says, "Lol, that's never true." I understand what they mean there, where it's like, it's kind of like when someone tells you like, this table will never change. You're like,
right. But so that's great, right? Like we've had this argument and we've agreed on an approach because you're never going to run it again. When they inevitably come and run it again, you're like, listen, buddy, remember this conversation we had?
Every time someone tells me like, this is never going to change, we would never need to update this. Like the next week, it's like, we need to add like 5 more columns. Like, okay, well, you know what? It's on me. I've fallen for this before.
Right. I've fallen for the classic blunder.
Awesome. Well, I want to be mindful of time. I don't know if you have any final thoughts. Someone did ask a question, but it was on different platforms, and I don't want to get you in trouble with AWS currently, so I'm not going to make you answer what platform is best currently. So this is more me apologizing to the person also asking the questions. Like, good question, maybe at some point, but I don't want to, put that on you. So
I doubt those questions anyway. Like, if it's a platform question, like for me, there's like, they're all good. The ones that are around that we know about are all good, and they all have their place. So it's a nuanced question, I think, anyway.
Yeah, no, I think I think that's a great way of putting it. Where it's like, there's so much to go into that question, other than a 1 minute ask. So want to be mindful of time. Do you have any final thoughts? Anything of that nature?
No, I'm excited for the future. I know that AI is scary to people, but I'm looking forward to what it brings to our space.
Yeah, me too. Well, again, thanks so much, Dan, for your time. I appreciate it. Thank you, everyone who listened. Thanks, awesome. Yeah, thank you. With that, I'm going to hit end stream.